Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where a group of men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics, current events, and other fun stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Kinnig.
And I'm Jason Peterson, here sometimes with a bad microphone.
Last week, we used a piece of software called Zencastr, and we had all kinds of technical problems last week with Brandon and I. There was about a 5-second delay between us talking. So I'm sure if you listened to the podcast, there were definitely some weird sounds in last week's. And then this week, for some reason, we just can't pick up Jason's microphone. So we'll see if maybe in post-production we can clean that up.
The worst case, I get a front row seat to this week's pod.
So in some ways, we've got something to talk about this week that we've been complaining about for 3 years. And that, Brandon, I think you and I are much more policy centric, and we enjoy looking through policy, picking apart policy, looking at the different political, cultural, social aspects of policy. And this week we have a doozy that was signed. I think its official name is the American Relief Package, or ARP, American Relief Program, popularly just known as the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. This bill passed on Wednesday of this week, and this bill really sets a foundation to transform several kind of key parts of the government's relationship to ordinary folks. And Brandon, that's what I found so interesting about this bill. First, there's just the sticker shock of the amount, 1.9 trillion. We've gotten used to everything starting with a B. Now I guess we just have to get used to everything starting with a T. But once you get past some of the initial shock of how big this bill is and how far reaching it is, there's really a lot here to unpack. And there's really a lot of direct relief to people, local and state governments. As we start this out, what's your overall kind of impression of just what the bill is and kind of what it took to get it passed?
Yeah, well, it's massive, like you said, right? Because the Democrats' mantra on this was go big or go home. There was a general sense among many Democrats that the Obama stimulus during the Great Recession in 2009 wasn't large enough, and it didn't do enough. And so the recovery was long and arduous and slow. And so here they wanted to go big, like leave nothing on the table. And they didn't want it to be too narrow. So you have the complaints from Republicans saying, well, this should be just focused on COVID relief and nothing else. No support for local governments, no support for kind of ancillary industries and small businesses that were impacted. And the Democrats said, no, like we want this to have an impact, and we don't want this to just be a blip on the radar. We want this to be big. And so it was intentionally massive and covers all of these different areas. So there's that. But you're right. I mean, this is the most far-reaching stimulus into the economy that we've had in decades and generations. There's nothing really to compare to it. And it covers so much. And I think alluding to what we talked about last week, there's a lot of support for local communities, local governments, public health, a lot for independent restaurants who were not covered by the first round of stimulus payments last year during the pandemic, who are going to get relief from this. We'll get into individuals and families because there's a lot there in terms of subsidies. But the other big takeaway here that didn't get a lot of coverage is this represents the first big expansion of Obamacare since Obamacare was passed. There's a lot of money going directly into subsidizing COBRA coverage for individuals, as money to assist in premiums in the ACA marketplaces. And then there's also incentives to the 12 or so states that haven't passed Medicaid expansion yet to go ahead and do that as well. So that's also a significant part of this. So it is very far reaching. I mean, there's impact through multiple sectors of the economy that we haven't seen before. And I think it's also interesting that it didn't pass with bipartisan support at all. I had assumed there would be at least one or two Republicans in the House and the Senate that would eventually vote for it, and that didn't happen. It only passed with Democratic support, so the bare minimum needed to pass. But that gives Democrats an opportunity, right? If this works and works well, they get to take all the credit for it, and they get to go on the offensive against Republicans and say, they voted against us. They voted against the economic expansion that we've seen as a result of this.
And I think your point, that was a lesson that Biden learned under Obama, because under that relief package, Obama let the Republicans set the overall dollar value of the relief package and the overall parameters of the relief package. And what did he end up getting for that? 4 votes, 5 votes? I think Biden made the calculation. It's not worth cutting this bill in half and eliminating the things that will have the biggest impact directly to people to get 3 Republicans to vote. Murkowski, Collins, and let's say Romney's vote. Getting 3 of those votes wasn't worth basically gutting the package. And I think that's a lesson well learned by Democrats.
I agree. Well, and there was no way to really get there, right? Because Biden met with the group of Republicans, deal-maker Republicans at the White House, and they were only wanting to do a third of what he had proposed budgeting. So there really wasn't a way to get agreement there. And I want to allude to something Jason had said too about the fact that you have 76% of the American public that supports this. That includes over 40% of Republican voters who support this. So Democrats have the American people on their side on this. So that is significant. So even though it was a partisan vote, it was not, it has strong popular support nationally. And that's something that, again, the Democrats can leverage in the midterm elections next year.
Absolutely. Jason, are you gonna try your mic here or?
Sure. We'll see if it works. If not, you might have to just shoot up the gain in post-production where you spend a lot of time, right? So here's one of the things that I'm most interested in, since I know you guys are going to go in depth on some of the other areas with your better microphones this week. Vaccines and testing. And there's over $47 billion given to testing, contact tracing, and mitigation. Yeah. And like the quote I saw was around laboratory capacity, community-based testing, mobile testing units, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Part of me is like, that's too little, too late, right? We're trying to do vaccines now. Why are we spending $47 billion on testing? Unless this is somehow able to be reused for the next round or for the fall. That's the last thing listed on some of these lists of what this bill provides. It's still a huge sum of money, and I'm not sure if it makes quite as much difference on the testing front now. Curious what you think there.
So let's run through some of the big buckets of money that's being spent in this bill. It's almost impossible to hit all of the areas because it's so big. But here's some of the highlights. And this bill it's cut up into multiple sections. So the first section we're going to cover is what do the existing federal government health agencies get? This is your CDC, your HHS, and other federal departments. So there's $91 billion goes to HHS for research, development, and distribution of vaccines and therapeutics. $7.5 billion goes to the CDC to track, remote administer, and monitor vaccinations. This number is what you were talking about, Jason. $47.8 billion goes to HHS to diagnose, trace, and monitor COVID-19 infections. Again, I'm with you. That seems about a year late for that one. $6 billion goes to developing and manufacturing vaccines. So there's a giant sum of money right there that go to the day-to-day tactics of producing, administering the vaccine, and then tracking the virus. So money well spent, but you're right. It feels like some of this could have been done earlier that would have had a bigger impact than what this is going to have. The second category is state and local governments. So there's $219 billion that will be paid directly to the states through December of 2024. And this is simply to close fiscal gaps in your budget. There's $195 billion for direct state and local aid. There's $175 billion in local aid for metropolitan areas to expand their COVID expenses around testing and tracking. So the states are going to get a huge sum of money in this, and we'll go through a couple of individual states to kind of break down how that tranches out.
Before you go to the next one, is it fair to say that that's one of the more controversial parts of this bill? How much money goes locally to states and local governments?
I think Republicans have couched this as this is a blue state bailout. And if you apply just a straight political lens to this, if you're sitting in a state like Florida or North Carolina or Georgia, a state that didn't take on massive expense due to the coronavirus, yes, you could frame that as a blue state bailout. I think that's the wrong way. I don't think that's a winning play for the Republicans to make, because again, pitting different states against each other, I don't understand. The circumstances are different. We're going to talk about Illinois in a minute. If you are really what dictated the different states' response wasn't red or blue, it was more urban rural. And if you take the states that have a consolidation of their urban population, those are the ones that are getting the most money, because simply COVID just hit them harder because of the dense population center. The third area we're going to talk about. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it's state and local governments that are the ones that are tasked with the public health response in many cases as well, right? They have to work. It's county public health departments that have to get the vaccine out. It's counties and cities that have to work with those health departments on the distribution, on the communication. So there's a lot of value in being able to have that funding, because that's not funding that these cities and counties would naturally have. They don't budget for a mass global pandemic and the response that's needed for that. And then I think it's also smart politics, or it's not smart politics for Republicans to rail against the local aid either, because you have local Republican mayors and county commissioners and local elected officials who are very much in favor of it. And then you also have to realize that even if you try to pit this as blue states versus red states, blue states have Republican red congressional districts that Republicans need to win back as well. And you don't win back the suburbs by railing against blue states and aid to blue states that have many of these necessary suburban districts that you need to win if you're going to gain back the House.
Yeah, giving direct money to schools in local towns, counties, and municipalities, railing against that, to what you just said, Brandon, I don't think that's a winning strategy moving forward.
No, because it's also local. It's about aid on the local level, and it actually it's using the Republican mantra of, being able to get the money closest to the people in the communities where it will have most impact.
Another area we're going to talk about is payments to individuals. So I believe the number they landed at was under $75,000. If you make $75,000 as an individual or $150,000 as a couple, if you make under that, you're going to get a $1,400 check. That combined with the $600 that already went out, that is how they closed the loop on the campaign promise of getting $2,000 directly to people that were impacted by COVID. So that's coming. Here's what I think is the most unique aspect of this bill, and the thing that we're going to be talking about years to come. This is the changes to the child tax credit. And this is a little bit wonky to understand. It takes a little bit of reading of a couple sites to kind of get this down. But right now, the child tax credit is $2,000. That is being increased to $3,600 for kids 6 and under, and $3,000 for kids 6 and above. And how this works is when you fill your taxes out, you would list your number of dependents. That would get you a tax credit that the government would then pay back to you with your tax refund. What they're doing now is saying, we're not going to hold that money. We're going to pay it to you every month. So if you have 3 children under the age of 6, now I have to do math, you're going to get a check from the government for $900 a month. Because what they're doing, instead of holding that money, and this is a common tax complaint from Republicans, they're not taking that money, holding it, using it, gaining interest off it, doing things with it, and then giving your money back to you as some sort of refund. They're simply going to refund that money to you now on a monthly basis.
And so, is there an end date to that, Craig, or is that just, permanent?
This program goes on for a year. This is not a permanent program. But as you know, Brandon, from working on the Hill, once a popular program gets set, it's not going anywhere.
Right. And Democrats know that. Yeah.
Correct. See Obamacare, which Republicans have made a 12-year or 10-year run at and failed miserably every time. So this is the first. Another thing that makes this unique is it's not really means driven. Yes, there's a financial salary requirement, but it's not as if this is only for if you're unemployed, or this is only for if, let's say, your personal finances exceed some sort of threshold. This is the government saying this is your money. If you make below X amount, we're going to give it to you on a monthly basis. To me, and Jason, you and I talked about this a little bit warming up, this is the first step towards the government providing a universal basic income.
That's right. And I think a lot of people will be paying attention to that. There's been a lot of research into universal basic income recently, and there's even some news this week from Canada. If this is very successful, you're going to hear more about that in the near future.
Yeah. Yeah. This is something that I think the American people are going to say, where else in the tax code can something like this be applied? Where else can we use this same concept to put money directly back into people's pockets? So other things that go to individuals, there's $21 billion in renters assistance. So again, this is the what they're helping people out with paying their rent. And again, we talked about the dependent child tax credit goes from $4,000 to $8,000. So all kinds of different changes in the tax code, but all designed to directly put money in the pockets of the American people. And then the last category I wanted to cover real quick is what do businesses get out of this? So there are $30 billion in a small restaurant relief fund. This is money particularly targeting small restaurants to help keep them afloat. And there's an additional $15 billion in PPP, which restaurants and other businesses can apply for. So there's no way we could list out every dollar allotment that this thing touches or who this goes to. But as far as ambition goes, I mean, Brandon, this is about as wide-reaching a bill as you're going to see pass the government at any time in U.S. history, especially right now, where the perception is we're locked in this partisan gridlock and can't get anything done, when the reality is we just did something really, really, really big.
Yeah, I mean, this is the most far-reaching legislation in terms of covering every facet of the economy we've had since the New Deal, really. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And like you said, there's even too much to cover. I mean, there's outdoor entertainment venues. Every sector of the economy has funding that is included in this bill for it. That's been attached. It's very far-reaching. It's very large. And it's something in the first 100 days to have accomplished. It gives Biden plenty of time to now go out and speak to it and to communicate the benefits. And I know that's what they are planning to do. There's a series of road trips that are going to be made with Joe and Kamala dividing up and speaking to the benefits of this bill community by community. And that's going to, I think, be kind of the focus over the next several months because it's so massive, is just communicating how it's going to filter down on local level and help out people and businesses.
That helps politically for 2 years from now, too, if they get that message out. Craig, with how much you've studied this, with how much you've studied this, is there, we're just rolling off the billions and billions of dollars that are getting spent here. And most of these programs sound really great on the surface, but what kind of accountability is built into this? What kind of transparency exists for us to see how the money's spent and how effective it is over time? Do we have to rely on reporting that comes out in 3 years, or is there anything ongoing that people pay attention to?
That's a great question. I mean, with the first PPP program, yes, that was, we had to get money to people. And if some of that fell into the wrong hands or got misappropriated, so be it. The situation was such that money in hand was our number one priority. And I get that. But it doesn't feel like we're exactly in the same spot with this And I do expect that there's got to be some sort of more oversight, especially around the programs like the PPP, the restaurant bailouts, things that we know that those are hitting the mark and they're getting to the people they're designed to. I hope the Biden administration does something with that other than the once a year report on this, but I'm not holding out hope that we're going to see a huge increase in transparency around this money.
That is a caveat there. You would hope that they've learned the lessons from just the headlines that came out last year with these, large corporations that ended up receiving benefit and smaller businesses that did not. And that was the issue with the PPP specifically, is that you had this mostly driven by big banks who were incentivized to get applications in front of large corporations over the small mom and pop businesses. Many of whom lost out on the first round of stimulus. So there is a caveat there for the administration to ensure that you don't have headlines like that emerge again.
And I wrote down some reasons why Republicans should like this bill. And the first number one I wrote down was it creates no new government agencies or it does not add to government bureaucracy. Brandon, for my entire adult life, Republicans have basically, starting with Reagan, the worst thing you can hear from anybody is I'm with the federal government and I'm here to help. And all of the problems that impact America could be solved just by putting more direct control of resources in the hands of the American people. This bill does that. There's no new big government agency. There's no top-down control. That would be something that traditionally Republicans could find positive in this bill.
Yeah, I would think so. And that's what I admire about it. It's great. I mean, I think the federal government, in my point of view, is too large. It is too unwieldy. The bureaucracy is massive. And that's why many of the failures we've seen in the past have been due to the over-centralization of the execution and distribution of these types of aid programs at the federal government level, where they get bogged down in the bureaucracy. That's not the case here because you have all of this earmarked for local government and local programs and local businesses and individuals. You don't have the creation of a new bureaucracy to manage it. You don't have a new cabinet position. You don't have new agencies, like you said, which is quite remarkable because when we've undergone previous crises in our history, they've almost always resulted in a new bureaucracy, new cabinet level positions, that type of thing. So there isn't any created on top of this. The emphasis does seem to be on just getting the aid distributed as quickly as possible on the local level where it's needed.
And what I like about the getting the tax credit and the monthly payments back to you, it's not really means based, and there's not a ton of rules to it. So yes, you do have to make $75,000 or $150,000 as a couple and under. That makes sense, but there's nothing in there like job requirements. So, for example, a lot of the issues with the current welfare laws, you can't have an adult male in the house and still draw welfare. That's ridiculous. That has done more to break up African-American families than almost anything else in the United States in the modern era. So there's no punitive part to this. This isn't an if-then. If you do this, then you get this. This is people need the money. This can help. Let's give it directly to you. And we don't care if there's an able-bodied male that's not working in the household. I think that is a huge leap forward in how we roll out some of these programs. And I hope it's something that's carried forward when we roll out new and additional community outreach, individual, and welfare programs.
Well, and the lack of complexity means that you need less government bureaucracy to manage it, right?
Yes.
So that's the benefit.
And it seems like we're not punishing you or in some way shaming you for taking this money. And this is another point that the Republicans could get on. I've heard Republicans talk about taxation as theft my entire life. Okay, then you guys should love this because we're taking money that in some conservative circles, tax money that we stole from you, and we're giving it back to people. We're not buying something for you. We're giving money that basically is your money to start with back to you on a monthly basis. I would think Republicans would be all over that concept and leading the charge on how can we find more ways to do this with other taxes to help people. Nobody's really jumping on that yet.
It'd be kind of an interesting experiment in the bottom up economic principles, the reverse of the trickle down stuff. Here, you're putting putting money in the hands of people who have probably lost their job or lost the ability to obtain the kind of income they did before COVID. And so they've buckled their belts. They're not spending very freely right now. They get their core means down. They get food. They get their rent paid. They get their kids back in school, et cetera. Maybe the economy starts to improve because they're able to find a new job and then go back out and continue the consumerism that they did pre-COVID.
I think this is the start of the universal basic income conversation that's going to happen in the United States. I think as a concept, I think that's coming. And I think this is the first step to say just giving people the resources they need to live a productive life has value in of itself. We don't have to put all of these rules or conditions or build all this bureaucracy if we just start with if you believe the conservative principle that people are at their best when they're making their own decisions, then give them more resources to allow them to make better and more decisions. Brandon, to me, isn't that what the nature of conservatism is?
Yeah, it's about having the opportunity to better yourself, better your family, go out, achieve the American dream, and having the resources to do that. And there is a point to be made that you have people that are economically disadvantaged that are really do not have those same resources, that are really kind of stuck in neutral. I mean, they can't get ahead. And so the idea is here, you give a boost to them, you give them the same tools that everybody else has, and then let them go out and achieve. And I think basic income, universal income is something that never been talked about openly just a couple decades ago, but it is getting more play now. You even have Republicans like Mitt Romney who have alluded to plans and proposals to start at getting to that point. So it's on the table now, and I think this does jumpstart it. And the great thing about these direct payments too, instead of just getting a tax credit like once a year at tax time, this is injecting a shot directly into the arm of the economy. Because if you get direct payments monthly, you're able to have an impact economically immediately, right when you need it, rather than saying, okay, we're going to give you this tax credit, 9 months from now or a year from now. The benefit economically is it going to be realized immediately. The people who need it most aren't going to be able to realize benefit from it at the time either. And so it really changes the paradigm too when it comes to how tax credits work, adjusting for children and dependents, all of that. Because if you move to this type of system and mechanism for disbursement, like you said, I think this could also be used for a whole host of other programs outside of this.
I don't get the argument from Republicans. If you look at the legislative pieces that Trump passed, one was the tax reform, which I think we all can agree, and the numbers bear this out. The majority of those benefits were at the top of the economic scale. The benefits to that were way more to people who had money, who manage money, have money in the stock market. That's where that got centered. And then the other pieces of major legislation are related to COVID-19. First was the PPP program that we talked about, tons of fraud, tons of problems, but had to get done. And then the third was the CARES Act. The CARES Act was the largest transfer of wealth upstream the United States has ever experienced. So people talk about Trump's legislative record. The two big pieces of legislation that stick out to me basically consolidated wealth and made it easier to consolidate wealth at the top end of the economic spectrum. Again, the CARES Act it kind of went by under the radar. Just what they did to the tax code that allows people to claim losses farther back. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in tax savings to the ultra rich. My point of this rant is even the Republicans know something's got to level out a little bit. We can't continue to pass legislation that pays nothing directly to people. And even though none of them voted for this, I think they will come around to it, and you'll start seeing some kind of tepid support for this bill as it gets passed and some of these payments start reaching people.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if you have some Republicans that attempt to take credit, even though they didn't vote for it and support it later on, because they're going to realize that it's going to be popular, especially as there's events highlighting local benefits, local impact.
And to me too, this represents the era of debating the size of government and deficit spending. That has to officially come to an end. That's over now. There's, on the Republican side, Brandon, there's no room for that conversation, is there? I mean, after
done. The last 4 years and the explosion in the debt and deficit, I don't see how there is. And if you look really deeply into the Republican arguments against this proposal and this bill, there wasn't many who actually spoke to the debt or deficit. Most of the criticism was leveled at not being narrow enough, but not so much on the debt or deficit impact. So I think you're already starting to see that conversation has long gone, and it becomes difficult to use that as a basis for opposition.
Let me ask it this way. Does anybody believe anymore, and this is more geared at conservatives and Republicans, that the federal government does not have a role in your day-to-day life? Are we done with that? Has that been officially, is that something that this pandemic did? Is to say this kind of rugged individualism, we've taken that about as far as we can go. And we really need a federal government that's in partnership with us to make your life and your opportunity and your day-to-day as good as it can be. It feels like we're behind that. I'm on my own and it's all on me and the government's not here to help. I think that officially died, or that era of government or political thought died when this bill got signed.
Well, I would say in some aspects, yes, but in others, no. I don't know that it's completely dead. I think, again, once we come out of the pandemic and once we go back to normal, I mean, I could easily see some of that kind of coming back to the forefront, and we having some of those debates again about the size and scope of government. I don't know that ever goes away completely, but there are aspects that stay, right? I mean, the role of the government in pandemic preparedness and in public health. I think that's something that has changed permanently. And I don't see us ever going back to saying, we don't need billions in R&D funded by the government or in public health funding. I think that is something that's different. There's going to be other aspects that are different as well as it relates to local aid that are going to be here to stay, and the federal government's role in getting that aid out to communities. But I don't know that just conceptually that we're going to say that, we just need a large government permanently and a government that's involved in people's lives. I think there's aspects of that will revert to norm.
Craig, I think you just found one of the foundational things that people still disagree about, really. I mean, it was just a few weeks ago during the power outages in Texas where that mayor got all the controversy for saying, power's out, you people need to take care of yourselves. Don't rely on the government to come help you fix this. And, that got a lot of press at the time. And I imagine the opinion of him and people around him are the same, even though this was signed.
That's a great example, Jason. That was kind of at the back of my mind over the last couple of minutes. I think for the people of Texas, especially, I think there's going to be a sea change in how they view government and their state government, right? I mean, Texas has always been this kind of go it alone, rugged individualist type of mindset as far as the state goes. And again, it's a crisis, right? So you have a power crisis like what you had in Texas that I think wakes people up to the fact that, we do need government, especially in times of emergency where there is nobody else to step in. You can't rely on the private sector. That's what government is there, is to step in when there's an emergency that confronts an entire population, just like the pandemic.
Jason, how many people in that mayor's town do you think agreed with the mayor on that statement?
I think it's higher than you think, Craig. I think there's a good, I'm going to throw out a number, 40% of people who live and die by that rugged individualism. And, that was definitely stressing that belief right there when something that's completely out of their control, how the state handles power distribution fails. But I think there are still plenty of people who say, get out of my life, government. I don't need you in here, whether it's for public health or otherwise.
Rick Perry said that Texans would rather freeze to death than to take money and help from the federal government. That is the former governor of the great state of Texas.
I missed that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. Rick Perry went on TV and basically said he would rather die than to take money from the federal government. That's how strongly he believes in his rugged individualism. I don't know how much rugged individualism you can have when it's 0 degrees in Austin and your pipes are froze, you have no electricity, and you're worried your family is going to freeze to death.
But I think what we'll see is, fast forward 9 months or 12 months and see how successful these programs are and how the money is distributed and used. And then maybe attitudes start to change, right? Because you have to remember there's a certain amount of cynicism built in. In the past, if money was handed out, it was to the top 1%. So of course the other 99% said, screw government, I'm not going to get anything from this.
I do agree with you that how some of this is rolled out ultimately is going to impact its popularity. But the question that I keep pondering is one of the things that has permanently changed in kind of the psyche of America coming out of this pandemic is that we shouldn't be all on our own. We should have expectations of help. We don't have to be where I'd rather freeze to death than take help to prove a political point. It feels like that's beginning to turn, and people are starting to ask a different set of questions to the government. Those questions centered around how can you get out of my way? Maybe asking a little bit more of what can you do to help? And I think it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years, in Biden's first 2 years in his administration. What are they willing to take advantage of on that? How much that attitude changes, and what politically can the Democrats do with it? And do the Republicans have any interest in picking up on that sentiment and forming a new brand of conservatism around it?
How closely does this correlate to one's sense of community? Because we've been very isolated for the last 12 months, right? A lot of people, right now, I'm in my basement. I'm not going to see many other people today, right?
Nope.
I think by the nature of that, you start to trust your neighbors and you trust your community less. Do you think that this potentially reverses that trend? Because here you see some sort of collective helping you out. In this case, it's government, but maybe it's local government and local officials that help distribute it and make that apparent.
I think you hit on something else that's going to be a big change, in that this pandemic has driven us all out of whatever community we were in. Community has been on a decline for the past 50 years in the United States, basically around the fall of religious participation. I mean, the primary group that people, the primary community that people participated in usually was their church and their religious community. That has fallen off drastically in the United States in the last 20, 30 years. Now you've got this pandemic comes along that takes us that we're already isolated and isolates us more, isolates us to the point where I'm skeptical of meeting people. We're looking for ways now to be alone instead of together. Being with your immediate family and nobody else is almost the preferred state right now. What I think is going to happen, and I don't know this is necessarily a positive, but the government is going to step in and fill that community void for people. You already see it. Government is the new religion. As people stop going to church and talking to each other and community, they've replaced that with politics. And I think this trend only continues. This is a part of this that I don't think is necessarily going to be a positive, but for right or wrong, government is going to start being that community in each of our lives, much more to an extent that it has been up to this point. I think the next question is, in what form and in what format does this take root and begin to expand? If it's just the government giving me what I consider my money back, I'm all for it. Once we get past that, now we're in some real uneasy territory. Once we get past the point where, the government community that I want and the help I want from the government is just free money, now we get to the real debate.
Yeah, this one sounds pretty dangerous to me. I don't know how government fills the hole in your heart that community is missing from, but I can also be optimistic that, hey, spring is here. We're all going to go outside. We're going to start shaking hands with our neighbors again after we've got the shots. Maybe that stuff changes and that counters your government hand that feeds. I don't know.
I don't think the government can replace community. I mean, it completely. I mean, I think government has a role to facilitate, the before and what community is, but I don't know that it can be a replacement for the organizations and the community ties that have always existed.
It can. And I think, as Soviet Union, that the government became everything. Here's, I guess my point is, there's the government, and the government's this body that we've created, and it's where we go to argue about the rules. Then there's the state. The government becomes the state when it starts taking over cultural aspects, economic aspects. The government becomes the state when it stops becoming the place that we go to argue about how much taxes we make, and we start arguing about who legally can say what to whom and how. I would make an argument with you guys, and I think I could do this pretty convincingly. We are right at the edge of the government turning into the state. And that's a very, very bad thing.
Very scary proposition.
But my argument is it's also inevitable. And the pandemic may have just shrunk 20 years off that curve for us figuring out what the state looks like in America. We know what the state looks like in Europe. We've seen the Soviet Union. We've seen socialism. We know what shit show that could be. We know what the state looks like in Venezuela. We've seen that. What does the state look like in America? Not 100% sure. But
I think this is a really good topic, and I think we're going to see more data coming out in the next few months, and it's one we should revisit.
As one aspect of community life shrinks, I don't think it goes away. It just gets filled with something else. And what we're filling it with right now, in a lot of ways, is politics and government. I don't know if that's a good thing. My guess is it's not, but I don't know what reverses that at this point.
So you look at that as being like a permanent change, though, Craig, not just like a temporary impact of the pandemic. So post-pandemic life, that's going to just be the norm, the new norm.
How do we work our way out of this, and who helps us work our way out of it? I guess I would answer it this way. Brandon, from my perspective, there's more people who have more to gain by shoving us down that path than to lifting us out of it. And that's why I think the pandemic is going to accelerate it. There's going to be more people with more opportunities to take advantage of to push in this direction. So if you're against this big bill, you're throwing your hands up, shooting up road flares saying, hey guys, number one, we just spent more money in one shot than ever's been printed in the history of humankind. That has to come with some consequences, right? I mean, we can't all just think that's going to pass through and we're going to pay no price for that. There's got to be something to that. And two, we just took things like concepts that have always grounded us, like benefits are needs-based. And to get benefits shouldn't replace work. These have been core concepts to the government, which now are changing right before our eyes. If you keep running that thought exercise, where does this end? And I think that's the question we're going to have to start kind of grappling with as some of these programs come online. Because if the Dems get their way and this is popular, well, next the filibuster goes and it's on at that point.
True. I would just caution you that, we've had times in our history where we've kind of vacillated between populist socialist appeal and then kind of go it alone. And we've seen that ebb and flow. We saw that at its pinnacle during the Great Depression. But there's always been this kind of give and take, this tension, between these two, like, expansion of government versus the reaction to that. And so while I agree that we tend to move, we see marginal shifts in, government control and in government expansion in the different sectors. I don't see that there's that tension that's going to go away completely. I don't know that we're going to see a new norm where there's just 100% support for government intrusion in other places, such as speech or, other impacts of daily life. I think that it's going to be kind of a case-by-case basis. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that you're going to see different levels of resistance depending on where that goes. But you're right, because I think it's not going to just stop there. We're going to see attempts to make that same type of gain elsewhere. And so the question is, when does that happen and what pace? And what is the pushback to it, if any?
Okay, maybe a new topic that's a global community based. You guys can explain to me. I saw it start as a trickle in my news feed at the beginning of the week and end in an avalanche, and I started to regret having not read anything about it. And that is the topic of the royals and what the heck happened from Oprah's interview, and why is this being covered so much by all the major news stories, whether it's from Fox or New York Times, and why has it captured the imaginations of Americans when normally I think British royal politics is, left behind with Lady Di?
I have no idea. I am one of the greatest things the founding fathers did was strip away the idea of titles and monarchy and all of that bullshit. This is what I want to say about this. Anybody who likes the royals, please spend 15 or 20 minutes Googling political theory of monarchy. How did monarchies come about and what is a monarchy? If you knew a little bit about the history of a monarchy, maybe you wouldn't be so into these people. Because these people are the remnant of a political system that said certain people were chosen by God to rule other people, and they ruled in absolute. Meaning, if I woke up one day and said, oh, and by the way, this is something kings did, anybody that gets married in my kingdom, I get to spend the first night with the new bride. That's the rule. So maybe before we talk about the royals, maybe I would love if people would just have a tiny bit of historical context to what a monarchy was, why we got rid of it, and why we should never be talking about it again. That's my thing, Brandon.
That's definitely one opinion. Well, and what you speak of, Craig, is referred to as the divine right of kings, right? So this idea throughout the centuries that monarchs were bestowed with power by God, and so they were there to rule and God's representative on earth, which is a very dangerous thing, right? Because you can't question the king if he's God's representative on earth. I mean, so there's that aspect of it. But I think you also forget that Americans are inherently a people of contradiction, right? We broke away from King George II, formed our own country, established this idea of a democratically elected president. And then what happened? You had many Americans that went to George Washington and wanted to make him a king. And it's like, hey, we just got rid of a king, but yet we want a king. And so we've grappled with this throughout our history. And for the last several decades, there is a large portion of Americans that are just fascinated and infatuated with the royals and with the monarchy and just all of that. And I won't claim to be able to explain it other than anecdotally. I've seen it around me and I know plenty of people that are smart and educated and not and are supportive of democracy, but are just very fascinated with the royals and the monarchy itself, right? So we've seen that time and time again. And so it's a celebrity aspect of it as well, right? There's an entertainment aspect, and it's escapism. We came off of a very awful, grueling year in our history, a very grueling election cycle. And so the drama with Harry and Meghan is an escape, an entertainment escape for many Americans as well.
When did in America, if you have more than me, I feel no sympathy for you, I can't relate to you in any way, and I have no empathy for anything you're going through? That's what struck me about this.
Yeah.
You've got a young woman who's a young mother saying, hey, I was really struggling with my in-laws and this was tough. That's something everybody can relate to. And the reaction is, you're a millionaire, you're a princess, you're an actress, tough it up, suck it up, who gives a shit? Is that what we are now?
Well, and that's overly simplistic. I mean, we share a common humanity, right? I mean, everybody has bouts of depression. Suicidal thoughts can affect anybody on the economic spectrum. So there are basic core components of just being a human that have an impact regardless of how much money you have. And then you couple that with the fact that as a new young mother, you're in this family that is extremely controlling, and every aspect of your day is scheduled out. You lose your autonomy. Have any of you seen The Crown? Do any of you watch that on Netflix? Am I the only one? Okay.
No.
So again, even if you're not a monarchy lover, monarchist, it's interesting to watch just to see the historical pieces that fit in. It's not entirely historically accurate, but there's historical events that are juxtaposed in each episode. But there's aspects of that saga. If we remember what happened with Diana, where she was a young newlywed mother, same thing, where she lost her identity and felt isolated and nobody to turn to. And so I saw semblances of that with what Meghan was explaining happening to her, and how she turned to help and said, hey, I need some help. I need to see a psychiatrist. I need someone to talk to about mental issues. And they said, no, just tough it out. Like, we're not going to help you. And she's like, I need help. So that was not surprising to me, because Diana had similar issues and she went to them and they acted the same towards her. They're very much an old school mentality of, in terms of, you just have to figure it out on your own. We're not going to give you any help. Your life is going to be scripted from this point out. You don't have any autonomy. We're not going to change. And they've always grappled with this thing to be popular and to continue to have the popular support as an institution. They've had to be able to change, and they've done that grudgingly. Yeah. And that's been to their detriment in many cases.
Jason, let me ask this. Would you rather have nobility or celebrity? In the United States, it feels like we've substituted nobility for celebrity. Would we be better off if we just created a noble class and we just dumped all this attention and time we waste on the Kardashians and this other shit we do into an American nobility? Wouldn't that be better?
Hell no.
But we could control who's in the nobility.
But that you're introducing basically a caste system, which becomes permanent. Then at least the celebrity is short.
Make the argument we don't have that now.
And
we have some aspects of that now. I would argue. Yeah, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not formalized, and there's no titles to it, but it's just by nature it happens.
But wouldn't you say most of celebrity is, to use Brandon's word earlier, entertainment? I mean, yes, that people with a lot of money and a lot of fame get put on a pedestal, but that pedestal can be chopped down really easily to where they're, brought back down to earth. Once you have this noble class, that carries on over time, and they become untouchable.
I'm interested in maybe establishing an American nobility, because then we could control who gets into this class. You can't have some rando make a sex tape and 10 years later, her entire family permeates every aspect of our culture. Talking about the Kardashians, Jason.
Yeah, I tracked that, but that at the end of the day, you can ignore. It doesn't influence your life if you want to just turn off that part of the channel, right?
I don't know. I guess So I'm about 100 hours deep into this Revolutions podcast. And I will admit, I just want to go on a revolution for everything now. But one of the things they really talk about is the role of nobility. And every culture has created nobility or elites in some way. America is no different. We have a classification of elites. Mostly it's culture elites, actors, people that are in the public specter. We've created that, and we treat them almost like royals do. So when I saw that interview with Meghan and Harry, that interview could have been done with any number. That's an Angelina Brad Pitt thing, and basically it's the same thing.
Well, and Jason,
the interviewer was too, right?
Yeah. Well, and Jason, you made the comment about them being untouchable, nobility. And maybe our celebrities aren't untouchable, but they do seem to operate in many cases under a different set of rules or privileges than the rest of us, right? I mean, you could argue that what Jeffrey Epstein did caught up to him eventually, but he was able to do what he did for a number of years because of his celebrity status and the people he knew and the connections. I mean, anybody else would not have been able to get as far as he did for as long as he did. So there is some question that we do create a kind of a separate system and a separate set of rules for our celebrities and people that we put on a pedestal, and maybe not intentionally, but it's just what ends up happening.
Gabby,
it sounds dangerous, though, doesn't it?
Would you rather be Frederick, Prince of Sweden, or Brad Pitt? That's what I mean. We've just
at least he was born in the Midwest.
We've just substitute one noble elite class for the next.
Yeah. No, and we put on pedestal billionaire tech moguls too, right? I mean, look at Elon Musk. How much of a voice does he have?
Yeah, absolutely.
Jeff Bezos.
You can take Bezos, but these are the new. That's American nobility. We've created American nobility is based on money more than anything. Instead of land and title and tradition, it's just how much cash do you have? Because
with money comes power and influence, right? I mean, they're able to influence and to have impacts that other people can't have on any level.
And I wouldn't defend it, but at least there's a sense of entrepreneurialism. If I just mangled that word, there's some entrepreneurialism there rather than you were a landholder and it passed on, and therefore you are noble again. Your children are going to be nobility.
I agree for the most part, except for those cases where the wealth is just inherited, and you have, Paris Hilton, who was, again, didn't really do anything to earn what she had, but.
True, but our three other examples, right? Bezos, Musk, and even Oprah Winfrey, they are self-made billionaires. Yeah. And so there is a certain amount of respect that goes with it. Now, to Craig's point, they're not nearly as popular as Brad Pitt,
right?
And
and a key difference too, Jason, is that royals in most of these countries, including the UK, are subsidized by the American taxpayers. Their lifestyle, they don't have an income or earn an income because their income is derived directly from taxes, and so that is different than our celebrities, obviously.
Yeah.
I wish that I could do like a genetics test and I find out that I'm like the sub-prince of Liechtenstein or something. And all I do is get a title and just travel around doing stupid stuff all the time. That to me is how I see what nobles do. You shake hands, you show up to they're opening a new Wendy's or something, and I get to cut the ribbon as the prince or something.
That's the American nobility. You get to cut the ribbon at a Wendy's.
With the big scissors,
That's what American nobility would do. Yes, American nobility is here to open up the next fast food restaurant that all of you fatties need. And I just cut the ribbon, shove a burger in my face, shout USA, and Prince's out. That would be fantastic.
I think your point is so many people are coming out here, Craig.
So many people are qualified to be royals. We just need more of them.
Shoot.
Jason?
Shocking that was the number 2 story of the week. Then,
do you think Cuomo survives the week, Jason, or do you think he's finally met his match?
He's gone. He'll be gone.
I think so too.
Isn't he stubborn though? My gosh. Like, I mean, he keeps trying to hang on, but I don't know how he can at this point. I mean, you have the two senators from New York that are calling for him to resign. You have 55 state lawmakers. I don't even know how many New York members of Congress now, too many to count. I mean, he is done because, I mean, if he were to even stay there, he can't be effective. I mean, he's isolated completely now.
There's another case where I'm curious what the laws look like. Is there a potential for some sort of vote of no confidence and he gets pushed out?
Well, I think know. The only way to push him out is through impeachment. And I think he said they need 70 votes to start an impeachment. And to your point, Brandon, 55 people have already said he should resign.
Yeah.
So they'll hit that threshold very, very quickly. I mean, to me, this is somebody who the circumstances elevated above what his performance was. Everybody knew Cuomo's reputation for being a mean person who's hard to work with. I mean, that's been around forever.
Yeah.
Again, he's part of an American nobility. His dad was the mayor of New York. In 2006, they cleared the decks for him to be attorney general. He was the only one that ran.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways, this is small and petty of me, but I always do kind of enjoy it when someone like that takes a big face plant.
And somebody that was riding high just a year ago, right? I mean, he was like the person we all look to as like the leader in America when it came to the pandemic. And he wrote a book during the pandemic about his leadership style and talk about the fall from grace. But it's been, I think, years in the making. I think people, like you said, Craig, that have followed his past and who he is. He's bare knuckle, cutthroat, very difficult to work with. He had all the tendencies and qualities that would lead you to believe that he is someone who would do this type of behavior and someone who would, hide bad behavior as well to the degree he did. And I've said for a while, I think it's months now, I was wondering when the nursing home issue was going to catch up to him, because what happened with the nursing homes in New York was just awful during the pandemic. And then you add on top of that the fact that he was misleading the feds and and actively telling his staff to lie about the numbers. I mean, you can't get worse than that either.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, he just overplayed his hand. Writing a book about your leadership in a crisis in the middle of the crisis is dumb, obnoxious, made people upset. And here's what I don't get. And this just gets into a lack of awareness. If you've been a jackass most of your life, isn't it natural to think the second you step into the spotlight, everybody's going to come at you? That's how my mind works. His, I guess, is just like, I'm so cool, none of these people would say anything bad against me. But I don't see how
it's arrogance.
He's got it gone.
And it's arrogance that breeds arrogance. And it's that type of arrogance that led him to believe that he could just, basically do whatever he wanted. And the sexual harassment issues against these women, too. You get to that point, that pinnacle where you think you have the power, you can do it because nobody's going to question you. And so we see that time and time again.
Jason, cynical question. If none of the sexual harassment stuff would have surfaced against Cuomo, could he survive? If the only scandal he was facing is what he did in the nursing homes and the pandemic, could he survive?
Yeah, I think so. The nursing home stuff didn't catch up with him until now, right? And the fact that it was so early on in the pandemic and we didn't know very much and we didn't know how it spread, and he could have gotten around that.
Do you think Cuomo could come out and just do a little bit what you just did? Hey, it was early. I made a mistake. This wasn't, we were dealing with the data. Do you think that's in him to do, even if it meant saving his governorship?
Not from what I've seen, no, to be fair. That's not his personality.
No. But it's not just that, right? It's about the fact that he misled about that, too. It would be one thing if that was the case and he issued a mea culpa and said, hey, it was early, I was wrong, mistakes were made, I'm extremely sorry, apologize. But he after the fact, misled about the numbers and continued to do so. That's what's difficult to come back from. You intentionally deceive even when you know you've made a mistake.
Let's end with our usual. Who's watching something good? Who's listening to something good? Who's reading something good? Who's going to something good? Maybe we could add that. That's a category that soon will be back in. Brandon, I can start asking you, are you going to travel anywhere? Are you going to do anything here? I mean, that's all back on the horizon. But does anybody have anything they're watching, listening, doing that is good right now? And as usual, it's just an outflow of too many things to choose from.
You know what? My wife and I were going to go to the movie theater this afternoon to see Minari, I think it's called. Maybe I'm mispronouncing it. It's a foreign language South Korean film that's like 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, supposed to be really good. And we were kind of hemming and hawing on going into the actual theater and, how many people are in there, how big is it, all that kind of stuff. And then we saw that you can stream it online for $20, and I think now we're aiming to do that. I can have a beer and sit down on the couch and watch it. And
I'm with you.
So again, we won't leave the house.
My wife and I look for any excuse to say, well, we could just stream that, or we could just rent this. We are actively looking for reasons to stay in the house.
Yeah.
And see, I'm opposite. I'm looking for any reason to get out of the house. So I've been to the theater a couple times. I do. Yeah. So
you're clear. You're good to go. I'll be there someday.
Well, and I will say, having been to the theater a couple times, I mean, they are doing good with spacing, and there's still fewer people are still trickling in. So the handful of times I've been to the theater, I've had, 8, 9, 10 seats separating me and the next person. So it's good.
And I got my first vaccination shot on Tuesday of this week. My mother-in-law, who's 83, she has had both of her shots. My wife's had one shot. So it is progressing. Now, we're kind of gaming the system a little bit in that the rural counties north of Kansas City, they have vaccine, but they have very little interest. So they have opened up the sign-up process for people outside of their immediate community. So we live in the north suburbs of Kansas City, but we can go to Chillicothe, Albany, St. Joe, and there are Hy-Vee, which is a grocery store in the area. Through their pharmacy, they are giving out vaccination shots. And there are no questions asked. You don't have to show an ID. It's just, hey, I signed up for a shot. Yep, you look like you're eligible. Get over here.
Have you guys as company started talking about return to work?
My company, we were 100% remote now. We actually, I think, have given up our office space, and we're just going to do this 100% remote.
Wow. Brandon, how about you?
Well, and so my company is already remotely distributed. So, we're 100%. So we had already been working remote. But for us, the question is when we can start traveling again for client trips and client travel, which they're still trying to get a handle on, and when we're going to have our in-person company meeting. We were supposed to have that last year in Iceland, which everybody was excited about. And of course, that got canceled because of the pandemic. And this year was canceled just because it takes months to plan, and, they didn't have enough time. So that's a big question for us. But what you were speaking to, Craig, as far as vaccinations, that's a good pro tip for any of our listeners. If you live in any of the cities, particularly in Kansas and Missouri, just look online, go to the rural areas. And Hy-Vee, you can look for vaccine appointments online. Walmart, you can. Many of the rural Walmarts have wide open appointments. If you go to Sedalia, places that are out of the urban areas. And I've heard from friends you can get in pretty quick. And like you said, Craig, most of them aren't even, seen if you meet the tier requirements. It's just show your ID and get your vaccine.
And I'll put this in the show notes, but my wife follows this Twitter bot that somebody whipped up that
KC
goes out
Vaccine
to
Watch.
Is that it?
Yep, KC Vaccine Watch.
On that thing, I mean, it will tell you exactly what sites to hit, where to go,
when appointments open up. Yeah, so exactly when. Yeah.
I was just looking at, Craig, you just did this, Hy-Vee.com or whatever. You can find online someplace nearby that has these.
Yep. If you go on the Hy-Vee website, Hy-Vee is a grocery chain. There's somewhere on there that says COVID-19 info or COVID-19 vaccine. They list their stores, and you can go through with who has appointments. And again, in the northern areas of the state, there's no questions asked. I think more towards the city, you might have to show an ID to confirm where you are who you say you are, but I got one on Tuesday, walked in, they're like, yep, you look old enough, got the shot, and that was it. So I was like, because my wife's like, make sure you bring your ID, bring your insurance card, none of that. So vaccine is out there. You just have to
know where to look for it.
Symptoms for getting it. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's another pro tip too. Some of the pharmacies like CVS, they're not giving it out publicly to individuals, but they get vaccine stock that they then distribute to nursing homes and assisted care facilities. But they have leftover stock. So if you call them, they will get your name on an internal list. And at the end of the day, they will provide you with a vaccine. I was able to get my mom on a list pretty early. I actually called a local CVS, got her on a list the same day they called me back. We have extra vaccines today from our nursing home run. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of ways.
And I'm expecting too in the next couple of weeks, vaccine production is really going to kick in, especially when Johnson & Johnson comes online, and it's going to be way easier than even what it is now.
Well, and Biden's goal is for everybody, all Americans, to be eligible by May 1st, and trying to really push states to do that. So we'll see if that happens.
And I guess I'll end with everybody out there calling Biden, President Houseplant. That's trended a couple times on Twitter, basically saying he is mentally unstable and that he is not capable of being president. Well, he just got the most progressive bill in the last 75 years passed. And if your strategy moving forward as a conservative or Republican is Biden's going to become senile, good luck with that. Because if that's your approach, you just got your clock cleaned by the senile guy. Yeah. The senile guy just got a bill ripped through that fundamentally changes a lot of stuff that you didn't want to change. That's how senile he is. Oh, and that other orange guy you're still farting around with, you need to thank him directly for this bill. Because without his unbelievable idiotic performance, we would not have won those 2 Georgia seats. So if you're a Republican and you're really pissed off about this, you are genuinely mad, you have one person to look at, and that's the former president, because he basically signed this bill for you with his behavior, which led to Georgia.
Yep.
Bring him on again. Make him the nominee. Please do. Please do.
Careful what you wish for.
I think sometime in the next couple of weeks, the main topic we're going to have is New York's indictment of Trump. I think that
seems to be imminent.
Around.
Yeah.
It seems to be like they're prepping him for it now, but that's going to happen. So that'll open up a whole nice can of worms. Okay, I think that's it. Jason, I hope we hear you on this, and we could do for the second week in a row we'll end with. I hope we have anything that's usable, but I think we could probably piece something together.
Sorry to our audience. Next time we'll meet in person, use your good mic.
There you go.
Amateur podcasting is always a technical dice roll.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.